I'd like to yield to my friend from Louisiana, Representative Steve Scalise, and he's a champion of our Second Amendments. And thank you for coming, and I yield to you.
Well, thank you. I want to thank my colleague, Ms. Hartzler from Missouri, for hosting this leadership hour to talk about our Second Amendment rights and for yielding time as well. I'm very proud to rise in strong support of our Second Amendment rights and also in opposition to many of these bills that have been floating around Congress to take away those rights that are so precious to all Americans, those rights that were so important that the Second Amendment to the Constitution, part of our Bill of Rights, the first set of amendments to our Constitution, enshrined this right to the American people to bear arms. This wasn't a right that they just gave to the militia, to the military, to our local law enforcement. This was a right that was granted to all Americans because it was so precious and important. And when you look at some of the bills that are floating around here these last few weeks, and we were all shocked and saddened by the murders at Sandy Hook. But I think what's also disappointing is when you have these tragedies, unfortunately there are people, Washington politicians, that try to take advantage of those tragedies to then come behind and try to impose their own agenda in the name of somebody else. And when you look at a lot of these bills that have been filed, they had absolutely nothing to do with those murders or any of these other tragedies that we've seen. You look at Sandy Hook, he stole the guns from his mother. He murdered his own mother. I think they counted over 40 different laws that were broken by the Sandy Hook murderer. 40 different laws. And then somebody's going to tell you that one more law that makes it harder for law-abiding citizens to get a gun would have then stopped him from doing that, when in fact he didn't even break the laws that they're proposing. And so I think people see through that. People realize that these bills are unfortunately the same bad ideas that have been floating around for decades by people who just want to take away our Second Amendment rights. They just don't share those same beliefs that our founding fathers had when they felt that it was so important that all American citizens have these protections. I'm proud to come from Louisiana. We call ourselves the sportsman's paradise. And when you talk about the Second Amendment, we're not just talking about hunting. Some people want to say, the Second Amendment really is just about hunting. It's not about hunting. It's about a lot more than hunting. It's about the ability for people to protect themselves. I was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. During those days, there were some very dark days. We had a few weeks, not just hours or days, we had a few weeks where you couldn't pick up the phone and call 911. There was no 911 system. In many cases, there was no power for weeks. You couldn't get law enforcement to come if there was somebody trying to come and loot your house or worse. And so the citizen at home in their house with their gun was the only protection that people had for not just days, but for weeks after Hurricane Katrina. One of the more frightening things that happened after Katrina, and there were many frightening things that happened during Katrina, but after Katrina, local law enforcement gave an order to have the police actually go door to door in the city of New Orleans and confiscate guns from law-abiding citizens. It actually happened. It's been well documented to the point where when I was in the state legislature at the time, I filed legislation to prevent that from ever being able to happen again. And in fact, the NRA, who's so decried by all of these gun control advocates, the NRA actually stood up and said it's wrong for government to try to go door to door and take your guns from you. And people said, oh, well, that could never happen in America. And yet it happened. It happened in an American city, in New Orleans. After Katrina, there's actual video footage of a woman, Miss Connie. She was in her house in uptown New Orleans, and the police actually came to her house to take her gun, and she didn't want to give up her gun. And they tackled her. They broke her collarbone. I actually brought her to testify for my bill. I'm proud to say my bill passed back then. And no longer can anybody in Louisiana take away your guns, even during a natural disaster. And fortunately, because of the NRA's leadership, they made this a national law. It's now a national law. But that actually happened. And so this Second Amendment right is incredibly sacred, and it's unfortunate that some try to take advantage of disasters to go and try to chip those rights away. But that's why we're here today. That's why I'm proud of my colleague from Missouri and so many others who are here to stand up for that that right that we all hold dear. And I'm happy to yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was very helpful, I think, to be reminded of that firsthand account of what can happen and what did happen in Louisiana when the government came to take the guns away from the citizens there. And we don't ever want to see that happen again because, like you said, it's imperative for personal protection besides being a personal right. So thank you for sharing that. Appreciate it.